without further ado, Simon's pressed the I'm going to record it button, which you have to click got it if you agree. And then I'm going to hand over to our guest speaker, who's Jack Cornish from the Ramblers.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me here today. I have some slides, as you can imagine, so I will share those now. And as John said, we've got some time for a little bit of time for questions at the end, but also next week's session. So hold on to them as we go, and hopefully we'll go from there. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Can anyone see that? I've got thumbs up from somebody. Yep. Okay, got some nods. Brilliant. So yeah, as John said, I'm the program manager for Don't Lose Your Way at the Ramblers. I've been in post for about 3.5 years now, and our project Don't Lose Your Way is all about saving historic paths across England and Wales. So that's going to be my focus for today. Always, need to recognise the support that Don't Lose Your Way gets. We're actually a completely externally funded project to the Ramblers, with support from the Ramblers Holidays Charitable Trust, which is a separate trust for a separate commercial organisation, the People's Postcode Lottery, and Cotswold Outdoors. So always good to thank those funders. So in terms of today's, I've called it training, but it's difficult to know, workshop, whatever we want to call it. But in terms of today's session, I'm hoping to cover a bit of the legislative background behind the recording of historic rights of way, some of the process for saving those paths, putting them back on the map, a dive into some of the historical evidence needed or often used to claim these rights of way, what's coming up with the project with Don't Lose Your Way, and how hopefully people can get involved with that, and also a bit about why it's important. I think it's crucial for me to say at the beginning is that, potentially a training session could be, a whole day affair if I wanted to delve into every single aspect of this. So I won't be able to do every single bit, but hopefully you'll get a taste of what's involved with the process, and hopefully will inspire some of you to get involved with volunteering and to really help reclaim some of these paths. I thought I'd just start with this quote. This is reported about William Wordsworth from 1887. And you can all read the quote, but essentially the background story here is that Wordsworth was on the way to a dinner at Lowther Castle in Cumbria when he came across a wall across a path that he believed was an ancient right of way, and he tore down that wall. And then later on, this was reported to his host at the dinner, and who weren't happy with him. And he said these words: "I broke down your wall, said Sir John. I broke your wall down, Sir John. It was obstructing an ancient right of way, and we will do it again." And I wanted to start with this for two reasons. One is to talk about the fact that, despite what we're about to talk about in terms of a legislative framework that starts from the late 40s, rights of way have existed, as a concept and as a legal fact in English law for centuries. So, we are focusing on the legislation that codified and formalized a lot of that, but they have existed for centuries. And the other thing I want to hopefully enforce is that having rights of way recorded, and we'll talk about that in a bit, means that in most cases nowadays we don't need to tear down obstructions ourselves, because there is an importance to having a legal map of recorded rights of way. So, if we do find obstructions now, and if a right of way is recorded, then we can actually report to that local authority, and they can actually, remove the obstruction or get landowners to remove the obstruction themselves. So I thought it's just important to sort of look at some of the deep history of this, so to speak. So I think John, in his introduction, mentioned the definitive map. And this is where I start to go into the legislative background in all of this. The definitive map was first put in legislation in the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act in 1949. And that piece of legislation was, for me, a really sweeping, groundbreaking piece of legislation, as much as the other sort of achievements or work that the Attlee government did, the NHS nationalisation, that sort of work, because for the first time it really created a proper legal record of where people had the right to walk or to cycle or to ride their horse in the countryside and in our towns and cities. And this was in the context of a time where people, probably a bit later than where people were actually, it used to be the case that people knew where their rights of way were in their village, in their parish, in their district, in their communities. But people were much more mobile, and so we needed an actual legal record of all rights of way. And that's called a definitive map. It's a slight misnomer because there isn't one definitive map. There's, I think, 137 of them in local authorities all across England and Wales. But that is the legal record of rights of way. And when that act was passed over the 50s and 60s, I think the last definitive map wasn't completed until the 80s, and actually there might even be some that are still going on now, but that's another issue. Local authorities, when they were drawing together these maps the first time, in most cases they asked local parishes, where are your rights of way? Where do people customarily walk, or cycle or ride a horse or whatever in your area? They were also asked to look at historical records to see, were there rights of way in your community that should be recorded on the definitive map. But we know now that that was a slightly flawed process. Many paths were just, in most cases, accidentally missed off. We find lots of examples of a right of way that hits a parish boundary, then disappears the other side. One parish remembered to put it in, one didn't. We know that maybe access to some documents in the late 40s into the 50s wasn't as easy, and so some of the historical documents weren't looked at. But then there was also just misinterpretation of guidance, and so it was an incomplete process. So even though definitive maps were produced, they weren't definitive, and not all rights of way were recorded on them. On the definitive map is now recorded footpaths, bridleways, restricted byways, and byways open to all traffic. Just in case people don't know, I think footpaths quite self-explanatory. Bridleways means you can cycle and ride a horse on them. Restricted byway means that you can walk, cycle, ride a horse, and also ride a non-mechanical vehicle, so essentially a horse and cart, something about that like. And then a byway open to all traffic is, as it says, it's open to all traffic, including mechanical vehicles, so sort of like a road. And the definitive map is important because it is the legal record. It is the sort of sole definitive record of legal rights of way in an area, and it confers, having a right of way record on there confers legal protection. As a member of the public, it should give you some confidence, and we know this is not always the case, but it should give you some confidence that it is unobstructed, that, for instance, if it goes for an agricultural field, that it's the path is reinstated after ploughing, there's enough space between crops. It also gives protection when it comes to things like planning, that a right of way, will not just be built upon. And the local authority, the highway authorities, as they're called for this purposes, have a legal duty to protect and assert the rights of the public. So it is a really important. It's the reason for having a map, having a path recorded on, recorded, just so it goes on the Ordinance Survey Maps. It isn't just so it goes in, local walking guides. It is a legal protection, and that is really important. It's also worth mentioning that alongside the definitive map comes something called the definitive statement. Now, this is a document that in theory should give extra information to the map. So it should say, things like, footpath number 43 goes from footpath number 42 to the B163. You know, I'm making it up, but you know, it should give a description of where the path goes, and it all should also detail any legal obstructions, so essentially stiles and gates, and it should also have a legal width for the path, which can be important in certain cases, and particularly important, you know, for maybe especially for other users where, you know, when you've got horse and carts and things like that. But we do know that actually the definitive statement is less complete than it should be. I'm not 100% sure what the situation in Devon is about how well populated it is, but we do know there are quite a lot of paths that are on the definitive map, and that's sort of the most important thing. But actually, they aren't quite fully described as they should be on the definitive statement. So that's the background that we had with the maps, with definitive map from 1949. Just a note on when I'm talking about highway authorities or local authorities. Obviously, you guys are in East Devon. There are 3 highway authorities in sort of historical, I suppose, County Devon. So you've got Devon County Council, which is most of it, Torbay and Plymouth. They're the highway authorities. Some parts of the country it's split up in different ways where you've got small unitaries, but here most of it's in Devon County Council. So today, a lot of what my focus will be in terms of where you can find some of the guidance and stuff online is for the county council, but I think that will cover most people. This is not in Devon, but this is just out of interest. This is what a definitive map looks like. It's essentially an annotated Ordnance Survey map. So, you know, someone's literally gone on with a pen and drawn on the map, numbered all the paths, and it is held and should be available for the public for inspection. Sometimes there's more than one copy. I'm not 100%. I think it's in the council offices, but it is available. You, as a member of the public, you have the right to inspect the definitive map because they are public rights. They're your rights. You're probably more familiar with the Ordnance Survey Map. There is always the disclaimer on the Ordnance Survey Map that it's sort of the rights of way shown there are sort of illustrative purposes only, and they're not the legal record, which is correct. But it's worth saying that when a path is added to the definitive map, eventually it will go onto the Ordnance Survey Map. And I think it's once a year, the Ordnance Survey asks local authorities for any changes to the definitive map, any diversions, any additions, any closures, etc. And so ultimately it will get reflected on the Ordnance Survey Map. It also will, in theory, be signposted from any metalled road as well. So you know, it's a reality on paper, but it will become a reality in the world, if you know what I mean. So the next piece of legislation that's particularly look at, and hopefully, you know, I know not everyone likes me going through loads of legislation, but it's important to set the groundwork, hopefully, is the Wildlife and Countryside Act in 1981. And that, you know, I've sort of put the quote from it here, but you don't need to necessarily read all of that. But essentially, that gave the public the right to apply for a path to be added to the definitive map. So this is the basis for a lot of what we're talking about today. It's essentially any member of the public can say, I think there's something missing from your map. I think there's a right of way that is unrecorded on the map. And this is about recording rights of way that legally exist, but they're just not recorded. They might not physically exist, the path might not have been used for 100 years, but they do legally exist. And this particular, the first section I've got here from this act talks about basically any path where the public have used it for 20 years becomes a right of way through that usage, if that can be demonstrated. So that's usually that's you know, user evidence. So I won't be going that much into this today, and I'll explain why in a minute, but just to flag up, there is the ability for a path to become a public right of way through that usage. And then this is the other one. This is the sort of other main point, And this is basically, it says by the discovery of the authority of evidence. So essentially what we're doing is we're discovering evidence for the local authority and giving it to them. And the first one is probably the main one in relation to walking, but we are saying that a right of way is not shown in the map and statement subsists, or is regionally alleged to subsist over land to which the map relates. So essentially we're saying that a right of way exists, but it's not on the map, and therefore it needs to go on the definitive map. So the last bit of legislation I'm going to look at before I sort of talk about the process a bit more is the Countryside and Rights of Way Act. And for many, in many ways, this was a fantastic, it's a good thing for walkers and for people who want to access the countryside, because it created areas of open access land for the first time in England and Wales. So, I mean, in some areas of the country, I think in like the North York Moors, it sort of tripled, if not quadrupled, the amount of land that was accessible to the public. So it was a really important piece of legislation. It gives people, I can never name them all, but it gives people access to mountain, down, heath, moor, upland, lowland, commons, and forestry commission land. So, massive increase in terms of where we can walk. But at the same time, and more relevant to what we're talking about today, it established a cutoff date for historical applications. Originally, that was going to be 10 years from the end of 2000, so we would have been long past the cutoff date. But because of lobbying by the Ramblers, that was actually set as the 1st of January 2026. And again, this is about a process of recording rather than creating new rights. And applications, which I will come on to in a minute, have to be submitted by the 1st of January 2026. They don't need to be processed by then, don't need to be determined by then, they just need to be duly submitted by that date. So just to sort of emphasize, adding a right of way to the map, 2 types of evidence, user evidence and historical evidence. And don't use your ways focused on the historical evidence, because that's what will not be able to be used in just over 4 years' time. Sorry. So at the Ramblers, we wanted to get an idea of the scale of this problem. And so last year, sort of thousands of volunteers came together and we did a mapping exercise. And then we essentially compared current Ordnance Survey Map with 2 historical maps from about 120 years ago. And it was a desk-based exercise, but it was essentially, is there something on the historical map that may suggest that it was a right of way at that time, and therefore could be a candidate for us applying to put it back on the map now. So this is an extract here from Rock Bear, and you can see all of the blue dotted lines are potential lost rights of way just in this area. I say potential because each one will need research, and we'll come on to that before making an application. And it may be that in some of these cases we won't be able to find enough evidence for the path. And in some of the cases, the path has been legally stopped up. So for instance, we've got the A30 there. I don't know how old on a road that is, but it may be that when that road was built, if it was built in the last 120 years, that the paths that cross it were legally stopped up. I don't know, but there are instances of that. In the same way that in this exercise, a couple of volunteers drew paths that are now across Heathrow, main runway at Heathrow. I imagine they've been legally stopped up, and even if they were, there's not much point trying to reclaim them now. Anyone in this group or anyone can go and view this map, and I encourage you to do so. We've also got a process on there now where you can suggest a prioritization for a path, because we really want to focus on paths that will bring the most benefit to communities, paths that will create better circular routes, better off-road routes, ones where if there's already a path that goes roughly the same place, that should, that's not going to be our biggest priority, especially because we found over 49,000 miles of these potential lost rights of way. So we really do need to focus on the ones that will bring the most benefit, and then following up from that where we've got sufficient evidence of historical usage. So I do encourage you to go and have a look afterwards, and I'm sure we can send around a link after the presentation. So I keep on talking about an application, and so this is sort of what I'm going to focus on next. Really, is what does that involve? So any member of the public can make an application to a highway authority. You don't need to be a member of an organisation. You don't need to have any credentials, because essentially what you're doing is saying, I think you've got something missing here. Here's some evidence. And then in theory, the highway authority then goes away and does their own investigation to see, you know, to look at that evidence and to see if they can find any other evidence that there was a right of way. As I say, the application is made to the highway authority, and it's often called a DMMO application, a definitive map modification order, because you are asking the highway authority to modify the definitive map. I'm happy to say that Devon County Council have some really good guidance on making an application in Devon. They've got some really good forms and some detailed guidance that comes alongside it. So that's really fantastic to see. And I've actually sort of quoted from some of it in today's presentation. The other thing to note with Devon in particular is that they have been carrying out a periodic review, parish by parish, of the definitive map, which is great to see, because even though that is in theory a responsibility of the local authority to do, most of them don't do it. They just wait until people tell them if there's something missing. But I you know, I'm not knocking their efforts, but there will be paths that you know, haven't been picked up by that periodic review. But it's worth saying because you know, looking at what they looked at will be an important part of this process about claiming paths in Devon. And it may be after this meeting that, along with Tim, who I think is on the call, that we talk to the county council about getting access to some of those records to see, at least for the parishes in the Clyst Valley, you know, what was looked at. Is there any evidence that was missed, and go from there. And as I said before, some of the paths will be legally closed, and you know, it will be important to check as far as we can if something has been legally closed. But ultimately, underneath it all, sufficient evidence is required to actually make an application, and that's what I'm going to talk about for a lot of the session today. Yeah, as I said, really good guidance on Devon County website. This is just one bit of it. There's lots more pages. It talks about a lot of the things I've talked about today, really, and it gives a really good overview. The other thing just to highlight is, you can't really see on here, and I should have circled it, but here there is a link to a register of existing DMMO applications. This is a legal requirement of highway authorities to have an online register of all applications that have been made. So these are ones where they've been made, but the local authority have not yet processed them. They haven't made an order. But it's also really important to check that, because you don't want to duplicate, you don't want to do all your work and then realise that someone's already submitted an application. However, just because someone submits an application, it doesn't mean you can't submit additional evidence. So if you can find out what evidence was submitted with the application, you think, well, I've actually found another really good piece of evidence that will help it. You can submit that to the local authority to be added and considered when they make a decision about the application. Okay, I've just had a note saying my internet is unstable, so hopefully that won't affect this in any way, but fingers crossed. Okay, so the sort of next bits of this presentation are going to be focused on two areas. One is actually, you know, what it looks like to make an application, and then some of the evidence that is used. And as I say, this can't be exhaustive, but I'll give some sort of pointers about where you can get more information as well. So the first thing, this is a form from Darren Khan's council's website. It's pretty, it's based off of a national national form. They just added their address and some other bits on it. The first thing to highlight is the we. So this is essentially, as I said before, any member of the public can do this. And you can also do it on, it says we and then it says of. So for instance, the Ramblers, if people here get involved with the Don't Lose Your Way project and sign up as a volunteer to do research through the project, then we'd be very happy for people to, Joe blogs, on behalf of the Ramblers, for instance. But we want people sort of, reading our guidance and stuff like that before that. But it's just important, I suppose, what I wanted to highlight here is that anyone can do this. This is about the public's asserting their own rights. And then it gives you quite a few different options. I'm going to focus on two of them because they're most relevant to what we're talking about today. Adding a footpath or bridleway, restricted byway or byway traffic, which runs from A to B. So essentially you're saying it goes from here to here to here, and that's what should be added to the map. The only other one's a flag, which Ramblers members don't often do, but for instance, the colleagues that I work with a lot in the British Horse Society and cyclists may do as well, which is upgrading of a footpath or bridleway, restricted byway. There are a lot of, there's a good number of footpaths that are recorded as footpaths, but actually historically there were bridleways or even country lanes. So you can also, you can apply for an upgrading of the rights on the path. And then, so, and then this is the rest of the form. Essentially, you then, the form, the application form itself is quite short, but the meat of the matter comes in we attach copies of the following documentary evidence. So that's where you put forward a statement of case for why you think this particular route was used by the public in the past, and therefore why you want it to be added to the map now. And then applications have to come from a person and they have to be signed. And depending on the local authority, I'd need to check with the Devon guidance. They can be either submitted electronically or some. We tried to persuade otherwise, but some still like it to be submitted either by post or in person. But as you see, they've got some guidance there. A couple of the forms and I suppose processes I wanted to highlight that Devon County Council have got. And then maybe after this, we can have our 5-minute comfort break. One is they've got forms for notifying landowners and occupiers. Now, it is and this is something that, to be honest, the Ramblers have never been happy about. It is a requirement of an application to be duly submitted that landowners and occupiers are notified that an application has been submitted or is being submitted. And currently that falls upon the applicants. Now, the Ramblers have always argued that that shouldn't be the job of a member of the public to notify landowners and people leasing property that a legal process is about to happen to them. The County Council have forms to do that. I won't go into this too much now. They also have forms, for instance, if you can't find the landowner and occupier, to put up a sign on the path saying, we're going to do this. I'm not going to go into this too much now because we are expecting, hopefully this year or the beginning of next year, the process to change, and this responsibility will go on to the Highway Authority itself, which I think is where it should sit, because ultimately it's a Highway Authority process. They have better ways of getting access to owners and occupiers' details, and I think it's right that happens. It's also worth flagging, I haven't gone into it too much today, that change is alongside a package of reforms to the process, which we're hoping to be implemented soon. The legislation was passed in 2015, so they're a bit late in implementing it, which is designed to make the whole process a bit easier for applicants, for landowners, and for highway authorities. So, you know, if people sign up, we'll be telling people more about changes to the process as that happens. They have user evidence forms. As I say, this is not directly related to what we're talking about today, but you know, it is possible to claim a right of way based on current and recent usage, 20 years usage. And there's evidence forms for where you can basically get witness statements of people saying, I used this path for the last 10 years, or I used this path between 2000 and 2008 every day or every week or whatever. So they got that. And then they've also got a historical evidence checklist. I'll just show this and then we'll have a 5-minute break, I think. So yeah, they've got, you know, this is not a legally prescribed form, but it is actually quite useful. It is a form that they ask people to fill out, where they've got here a very handy checklist of some of the records that people look at to claim lost rights of way. It's really handy to have this because it gives, these are all standard pieces of evidence that most highway authorities will look at, but it is really handy for them to specifically spell out what the most important pieces of evidence are for them. So you know, it's quite a handy structure to go by. And yeah, maybe we'll call it for 5 minutes there, so I can have a glass of water and we can use the loo and everything, if that sounds okay.
That sounds good, Jack. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we'll have a 5-minute break. I make it 20:08 now, so that means 2013 will be recommencing.
Great.
I'm recording again then,
Okay,
John.
hope everyone had a... Okay, shall I, if everyone, hopefully everyone's back. I can't really see many people, but I can see 3 people, so that's good. Yeah, so as I said, there's a really handy checklist that Devon have produced of some of the information. Now, yeah. So I've been talking a lot about applications. I've been talking about evidence quite a lot. A couple of words on evidence before I delve into some nice, hopefully more interesting images of old maps and old bits of evidence. Essentially, when we're making an application, or hopefully when you make an application or other volunteers make an application, we're showing 2 key things. One is, where did the path go historically? It's probably important to say that some of these paths will be used now. They could be claimed by user evidence, but there might not be enough users, sort of enough users for the 20 years to claim them, but some of them will be used now. Some of them may not have been used for 100 years. So they are real variety. But we are showing 2 things. We are showing where the path went historically. Now that test is relatively easy to meet. We've had very good mapping in England and Wales or in Britain, going back to the late 18th century, but especially into the 19th century. Very accurate, good mapping. So, paths, historical paths are shown on old maps. So that is a relatively, that's the easier test to meet. The second one is the hard one, the harder one, and that's where we get into the real historical evidence. We need to demonstrate that on the balance of probabilities, the public have used the path in the past. It is a public right of way. It was used by the public, and under a piece of English law called "Once a highway, always a highway," if the public have used a highway in the past, they should still be able to use it now, unless it's been legally, unless their ability to use it has been legally stopped. So we can go back using evidence back to 1189. That 1189 date is because that is legally the date of That's the legal date of time immemorial in English law. So we can use evidence going back to time immemorial. If you want to be really precise, I think it's the 6th of July 1189, which is the accession to the throne of Richard the Lionheart. So I always flag that up because some people say there's an old Roman road here. Unfortunately, we can't use Roman evidence, archaeological or otherwise. But obviously, a lot of those roads and roads were used, after 1189. So you can use that evidence of a Roman road, but just not Roman evidence, if you see what I mean. The other thing, just to really highlight here, it's the balance of probabilities, and that's the legal test. It's not beyond reasonable doubt. We are just saying we are making a reasonable allegation that a public path existed along that course. And so essentially it's a 51, 51 to 49%. If our evidence, is tips over the 51%, that should be good enough. And an application there's a small number of instances where you find one piece of evidence that is knock it out the park, definitive, this proves the case in itself. I will show one of those pieces of evidence in a minute, but in nearly all cases, it's about drawing together different pieces of historical evidence to make that case that on the balance of probabilities, people used a path in the past. So it's about creating a narrative around those pieces of evidence that demonstrates that public usage. And I think there's a sort of an analogy that's used in law, which is, the case is like a rope. And so if you cut one strand of, one of the strands that make up that rope, the case won't fall. It's about, because you've got those pieces of evidence that make up the whole of the case. But as I said, there is the Devon County Council checklist. Have a look at that, but don't be limited by it, because it lists some of the most important pieces of evidence, but there isn't a limit to the sort of evidence we can use. There isn't anything set out in law that says you have to use these types of evidence or you can't use these types of evidence. I've seen, while most applications will, rely on about 20 different sources, and some of which we'll look at today, I've seen applications that I've seen an application in Sussex that used to extract from Virginia Woolf's diaries as part of the case. I've seen photographs used. I've even seen a cine film used to make the case. So there isn't any limit to the types of evidence we can use. But what I'll do in the next section is I will talk through some of the most important ones. And the way I see an application is that it's each application is a mini research project. It's not the sort of thing most people are gonna be doing in one day. It's actually, what you're doing is delving into the history of a route, looking through different sources to see what you can find in those, and then interpreting them. Now, the Ramblers are producing much more guidance about that, but there is also a book that is available that is worth looking at, called Rights of Way Restoring the Record. It was created by two volunteers who are members of the British Horse Society and the Ramblers, and I think the Open Space Society as well. And that gives a lot more detail about this process. We are going to be getting some copies that we'll be giving to the coordinator in Devon, who can lend them out. But it also you can usually find copies in local archives or libraries to borrow or to consult. You can also buy it online as well. And that really is really useful to setting out the in detail some of how to interpret the evidence. The Ramblers are also producing a lot more guidance around this as well, but I don't want to reinvent the wheel, especially with 4 and a bit years left of this. We haven't got much time, so a lot of it will be supplementing and giving extra information to the information in Rights of Way Restoring the Record. And hopefully maybe at some point we can do some more follow-up training sessions as well, and I'd be very happy to talk through different parts in that as well. So this is where the sort of fun, hopefully it's been fun so far, but this is where the interesting maps come into it. So I'm going to talk for about 5 or 6 different evidence sources and just point out some of the things on the map and how they might be used. The first one is enclosure. This is an enclosure map. I'm not 100% sure where this is from. I think this is about 1820s maybe. Now, I've tried to get examples from Devon, but they're not all available to me online that easily. So some examples are from elsewhere in the country, including this one. So this is an enclosure map from Gloucestershire. Now, in case people don't know, I'm sure a lot of people do know, but enclosure was a process of quote unquote reforming agricultural land usage and essentially taking areas of common land and commonly farmed land and enclosing it and splitting it up and creating a new pattern of ownership and usage that went on, well, from the 16th century all the way up until the late 19th. But most of it's sort of mid 19th century and before. Now, when they enclosed land, they created these maps, and these maps are designed to show who owns which bits of land going forward. They're also designed to show public rights of way. So you might not be able to see it, but just under the enclosure Gloucestershire up here, it says public carriage road to, I can't make out that last word, but it says public carriage road. So that's a pretty clear indication that that road was a public right of way when the enclosure map, was created as a public right of way through the enclosure map. There's also a footpath noted on here. It's got a number which will refer to a separate document which will have the details, but it's got a number and it says footpath 6 feet. So in a way, it's the 19th century equivalent of the definitive map and statement. It shows where the path is, and it even shows the width that the statement will show now. I started off with this class of evidence because this is one of those ones where if you have something on here, and if you do some reasonable searching to see if it hasn't been legally closed up, but if it's shown on here and it's not on the current definitive map, it is in of itself legally conclusive, because these are legal documents that were designed to set out public rights of way. So a legal event has occurred when this enclosure map and when this the enclosure of this land happened. And so if there's something on these maps that isn't recorded as a right of way now, that's the closest you get to a slam dunk, so to speak. That's the closest you get. When you find one of those, it's a really good day. And actually, in some cases, it's reasonable just to say to the local authority, well, this is it. This is the piece of evidence, and I want you to just go on this because it is legally conclusive in and of itself. Unfortunately, there aren't many pieces of evidence that are like that, but the most applications will include different pieces of evidence, but it's a useful one to show. So the next one I want to come on to is the Tithe Map. This is a Tithe Map in Clyst St Mary, so in the patch. And again, I'm sure a lot of you know, but just for clarity's sake, tithing is giving 10% of is essentially a 10% tax that was given to the church, and for many centuries it was given in produce, so bushels of grain or pigs or whatever, sheep, cows, wool was given to the church, the local church, as part of as a local tax. Over time, and actually, if you look at the records going back a long way, that was seen as an inefficient way to do a tax. Some churches were just, their tithe barns were full of grain they couldn't particularly use. In other places, it became much less sensible process as, you know, new industrial processes came on board that didn't really fit with tithing. And, you know, how do you tax an area where their main output is, I don't know, like a new manufactory producing locomotive engines or something like that? You know, it's sort of, it's a bit unsustainable. And so there was a Tithe Commutation Act of 1836, which basically converted tithes into tax, cash tax made to the church. But to do that, they needed to understand who owned what, you know, who owned what land, so you could work out how much that land was valued at, so they could work out how much tax that people would pay. And so they created the Tithe Maps. There's quite a lot of different levels of classes of Tithe Maps, which I won't go into too much. It's a bit more in where I store in the record. Essentially, one of the main things to note on here is that you can see there are roads here drawn in sienna. It's called, they're painted in sienna, and they are, well, you can't make a complete assumption, but in a lot of cases they are sienna because they are public rights of way. I say you can't make assumptions because you can't quite see it, but there is a little road here that has number 2020 on it. Now, each of these numbers relates to a tithe apportionment book that has the details of what the land is and what it was used for. And I looked up, and number 20 in this is private road. So it's not, you can't guarantee that something sienna is there, but often, but there may be a number on one of these. I think there is somewhere down here that would say public road. So again, that's really good evidence that you know, it was a public road. Couple of things to note with Tithe Maps. They show public roads like this, and they need to document them, because if something's a public road, it wasn't taxable, and so that's why they need to show public roads. However, there are other types of land that also wasn't taxable, which can trip some people up sometimes. So wastes weren't taxable, and like church land owned by the church. So sometimes you get Tithe Map that just sort of are pretty blank in land owned by the church because they weren't going to pay a tax to themselves. But they are a really good piece of evidence, and the Tithe Maps are, I think all of them that are available, that exist, are available on a website for Devon, on a website called Know Your Place, which some of you might know already. So you can dig straight into those and have a look at those online. Yeah, so this is actually, no, that's interesting. So I did actually look up the number for that. It is number 20, and it says Young Eastern Orchard, Lane and Waste. So there's two 20s. So I don't know, that's probably the lane, but is it waste? You know, it's inconclusive. So you can see where this is not, it's not like one piece of evidence is going to solve the puzzle, but it's all the pieces coming together. Okay, so this map is from, I can't actually see because, oh, sorry, Oxfordshire. Sorry, I've got the top is covered by my the bar at the top. Anyway, this map is a Finance Act map. So the background to these maps were Lloyd George's People's Budget in 1909, 1910. You know, it was quite a revolutionary thing at the time. It led to another election because the Lords blocked a lot of it. One main part of that budget was a shift, a proposed shift from taxing that would have basically a land value tax. And so, you know, for the first time, they wanted to, you know, tax especially unearned profits on land. And so, because it was around a time where lots of people were making lots of money and not really being taxed on it by just happening to own land that was on the edge of an expanding city, for instance. And so the tax was brought in to to essentially say to tax 20% from, they would do a baseline valuation of all the land, and then they would tax 20% when the land was sold, inherited, or every 5 years. Now, ultimately, the tax didn't really last for long, and so, you know, we don't have a land value tax now, but we've got the maps, and it was called at the time the second doomsday, because again, like the Tithe Maps, they had to survey and value every single parcel of land in the country to see how much it was worth, so they could then tax it if it was sold or inherited. So it was called the second doomsday. It's, you know, I suppose the Tithe Maps weren't called that because they don't cover everywhere, whereas this covered all of Britain and Ireland at the time as well. Now this is a map, it's a little bit of a crumpled one, and a couple of things to note on here. Again, like the Tithe Maps and you can see the roads that go here are uncoloured. If the road is uncoloured, the argument that we would make is that it's because it was a public road. You know, it was if an area is uncoloured, we would make it the argument it's a public road because highways boards didn't need to pay tax because they're public good. The other thing is that you can see on here that, so they use the Ordnance Survey as a base map, and you can see it's not actually the actual labels are off the page, unfortunately, but this line here says footprint on the Ordnance Survey Map. Now, in of itself, that doesn't prove anything because it's just the base. But landowners got a deduction on the land they owned if there was a right of way over it. So here you can see, I haven't actually got the I haven't got the headings, which is not great. But you can see you've got the number. You've got I think it is first it's the occupier and then the owner, so L Ducey, and then it's got the name of the type of you know, the type of property. So farm, buildings, cottage and garden. But they also had, this is sort of further, they're quite big books, so I had to split it up. But they also had deductions, and you can see they got a £10 deduction for there being a public right of way over the path. So just going back to this, it can be difficult because there can be quite large areas of land owned by one landowner. So it can be difficult to pinpoint exactly which path the deduction is pointing to. But if you can do that, that's a really good piece of evidence because, you know, the penalties, even more so than now, for lying to the taxman were pretty strong. And so you have to take it that if someone was claiming a deduction for a right of way in 1910, that was actually a right of way, and therefore it is really good evidence to claim a path now. Just check my time. Okay. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, I did actions on this one. Just to flag, because this is often a question that comes up, Ordnance Survey Maps, they are never going to be completely conclusive because even going back, this is the first edition. It's not the greatest copy of the first edition, but even going back to the first edition, they had a disclaimer about public rights of way, you know, things shown on there, not necessarily public rights of way, but they are still useful evidence to, you know, to build up that case that a path has always been there and demonstrate to some extent it was used by the public. There are also records, which I won't go into too much now, of actually how the maps were drawn up by surveyors, which can be even more useful actually than the maps themselves, because their notebooks and their field books that recorded who they spoke to and that this particular path went from this parish to this parish and things like that are really useful because they wouldn't be putting in their field books that this path went from this parish to this parish if it was just a sort of private lane and things like that. So there are other pieces of evidence you can bring in on the from the Ordnance Survey side. Also, I'm pretty sure the first edition Ordnance Survey and a couple of other subsequent editions are available on the Know Your Place site that I mentioned earlier on. Also, there are later editions, as in from the sort of 3rd edition onwards, I think, all available, all geo-referenced on the National Library of Scotland website. So I would, if no one's ever been on that, it's a fantastic resource. There's lots of other maps there as well. It's lovely layers. You can just flick through time of your community. Railway plans. Obviously, this is not going to be relevant to every path, but with the railway manias of the 40s and 50s, sorry, the 1840s and 1860s, at some points in a single year, over 200 railways were being proposed each year. And to propose a railway, each one of them had a private act of parliament. And when they, to be able to have that act of parliament, they created railway plans that would show all of the rights of way, well, all of the properties affected and all of the rights of way affected. And then also, to some extent, have to demonstrate what they were going to do with those rights of way. You know, there are specific closures of some, but most of them were crossings, underpasses, bridges, slight diversions, things like that. So they are, if you've got a path that goes near a railway line, because it's not even the ones that are just crossing it, but near it, as you can see here, there's a sort of tolerance, line of deviation. They got really useful evidence to show that, because again, they're backed up by an act of parliament. They've got the stamp of official authority on them. So we need to take it as true, as fact that they were true. So if you've got a path that's near a railway line, that can be really useful. But it's also important to say that they were produced for every single, you know, when I was talking about the railway manias in the 1840s and 60s, a third of those railways never got built. So there will be acts of parliament to authorise the railway with all of the official records that we've got for railways that were built, that have exactly the same weight as ones that were built. So even if a path you're looking at is nowhere near a railway, it's probably worth checking to see, you know, if there was a railway that wasn't built. Yeah, this is actually one from Somerset. They can vary slightly. This one doesn't really show massive amount of detail on the map, but there will be more detail on these numbers, which comes with a book of reference. So they might say meadow and public footpath, or meadow and path. You know, they vary some of the languages. Yeah, there's another one I think I showed the last session from Cornwall, which actually has on the map drawn paths saying, you know, public rights of way and things like that. Really useful. As I said before, there are no limits to what can be used. Just a couple of other things. Some of the other records, especially maybe some of the ones that's visual, so but no less important. Records, parish records and highway records. So if we can see that a parish or a highway or highway board, as they were, quarter sessions as they used to be before the highway board, if you can see that public money was spent on a route, then that's great evidence that it's a public right of way. Why would a parish spend £10 to repair the surface of a route if it wasn't a public right of way? Obviously, to some extent, that on a highway board level, that relates more to sort of what were roads, but it also does relate to footpaths and bridleways as well. And especially on the parish level, there may be an indication they spent money, or just that they were concerned about a particular route that was being obstructed. Because as I say, the rights of way have always existed, and so maybe, you know, and so that's a good inference you can make, that if something, you know, if the council were concerned that a particular route was obstructed in the 1860s or something, well, that's a good piece of evidence. There's also estate plans, manorial maps, just different local maps that were produced. This one here says, you can't really see it, but it says the lane. Again, that on itself may not be pretty inclusive, but it's another piece to the jigsaw. Sales plans, when land was sold, often they detailed the public rights of way that were affected by that land. Early maps of counties, quite a lot of which are online, that were sold to the travelling public. It's unlikely that would be definitive in itself, but it would be, the argument we'd make is, why would you sell this? Why a decent cartographer wouldn't want to sell a map to the public that showed a route the public can use. So I suppose what I'm trying to say here, there's lots of pieces of evidence that come together. And we've got about 19 minutes left, I think. So I'm just going to sort of quickly talk then about, I suppose, hopefully people get this, but just to re-emphasize, I suppose, why it's important for me. The Ramblers are really focused on the routes that will bring the most benefit, that will facilitate a better network for all, better access to the countryside. I say for all because quite a few of these routes, maybe even the majority of the ones that the Ramblers volunteers will be applying for, will be for higher than footpath status, because often the evidence is better than that. So it's not just for walkers. This is better access for cyclists, for people with buggies and things like that. Better access to the network. And as I sort of emphasised earlier on, there is a real importance about recording rights of way. Even if you've got a path that you've used every day to walk your dog, and you think there's never any chance that it's going to be closed off, it is important to record it. If it's not recorded, it's important to see if you can get it recorded, because even though the current landowner may let you use it and it's absolutely fine, that could change. The land ownership could change, or they could change their mind if they get a better offer from a quarry or I don't know, a land developer or whatever. So it's really important to actually have rights of way recorded. But then the other thing for me, and I suppose this is sort of summed up by the name of Routes for Roots, but paths are a really important part of our shared heritage and our history and our culture. They describe how ancestors sort of interacted with the landscape going back centuries. So yeah. And then I thought I'd sort of finish my talking about what's coming up with Don't Use Your Word. I've mentioned some of this already, but it would be fantastic if people could get involved with the project. You can go on the map now and suggest a prioritization. This is just a little clip. I think this is Ash Clyst Forest again, and you can see some paths there. Would they be useful connections? Seems to me that this one going north to south here that would connect into the open access lab would be a great connection. As I say, we don't know if we can get the evidence for it, but we want people. I'd love to hear all of your views. When you go on the prioritization, I'd love to see people suggest what you think is a high priority, a low priority, and a medium priority on there. So we can really start to focus on the ones that are the most important to people. I'm busy working at the moment with some volunteers helping me on more resources and guidance for people. So this is, I can't tell people that volunteering in Don't Use Your Way will be an hour once. We are asking people not to spend hours a week on it, but to see an application as a research project they may do over the course of 6 months or a year. And that's absolutely fine, because 6 months of a year's work to put a path back on the map that will be there for hundreds of years to come, I think is worth it. And it's really fascinating because you're looking at old maps, you're digging into the history of your area, and you often uncover lots of other interesting stuff along the way. But we know that it can be a little bit daunting, and so we're producing much more resources and guidance for this that should be out within the next couple of months or so. And then we'll be recruiting people to a Don't Use Your Way researcher role. There's not a loads amount of pressure on that we want, you have to do an application in this amount of time, but that will give you access to the resources and a network of coordinators that people can go to for help. And I'm actually coming down to Devon in a couple of weeks' time to meet some of our Ramblers volunteers, and we're going to, I think, hopefully come up with a bit of a plan about how we're going to manage this in Devon. So we'll be in touch about that. So lots more to come. but hopefully I've sort of whetted some appetites. Go to the website. There's a link there. don'tloseyouway.ramblers.org.uk. If you haven't already, you can create an account on there. It takes just a couple of minutes. That's a really good way of also getting on our mailing list, so you can hear more about the project and all these exciting things that are coming up. Help with the prioritization, then hopefully help with the research. I put my email address on here, and I've also put Tim, who I think is on the call. Yeah, he was on the call earlier on, who is helping coordinate sort of activities in Devon as well. So yeah, we'd love some, you know, you might have to bear with us for a little bit while we get everything in place, but we'd love sort of willing volunteers, and maybe we can coordinate a bit through John and Simon as well. So I really love this image. I think this is from the it looks very Edwardian to me, I think, but yeah, the whole Ye Ramblers. So on that note, I think I'll stop sharing, and we've got sort of 13 minutes, and it would be good to, I suppose, get some feedback from you guys about, is there any particular areas in what I've talked about in the next, I think we've got an hour next week, have we? I can't remember now exactly. What, you know, if there's anything particularly you'd like to go over again, or in a bit more detail, and also or answer questions about then, and I suppose if there's any burning questions now as well. Sorry, that was quite a whirlwind, I know. It's a lot to, you can never get everything out about this, I think.
I can start with a question, if I may. Apologies, I don't have a camera with me at the moment. My name's Ian. I've been doing my own sort of research. Got inspired by this back in December. I only found out about this, I think, a day or two ago from an email via East Devon Council. So I don't have the invite for next week's session and subsequent sessions. Where can I get hold of those?
John can probably help with that.
Yeah, okay, you won't have got an invite yet because we haven't created the Zoom event itself yet, but I've got your email on the list of everyone who attended this one, so I will email everyone the link who is here tonight. I will email you all the link for next week's session once we've created the Zoom event, and it's on Wednesday the 8th of September, and it's an hour session between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m.
I also saw a question in the chat, so I can grab that one as well. Andrea asked, where can we find copies of the enclosure maps? So I think for Devon, they're not online, unfortunately. They are for some neighbouring counties. And it's worth saying that not all areas will have been enclosed, but they should all be, they probably are all available in the local records, in the local archives. We'd need to obviously check that, but yeah, they should be, they're usually locally available. Some of these maps I've talked about are sort of at national level, like in the National Archives or Parliamentary Archives, but the enclosure should be locally. I can see Lisa.
A thing to add about enclosure is that Devon in particular had lots of unenclosed land, which typically was the high ground with poor soils. But even in lowland parts of Devon, like the Clyst Valley, for example, where Ashclist Forest now sits, in the pre-19th century, there was a lot of unenclosed land there. So there will have been enclosure acts to make that enclosed land at the point when they chose to turn it into forest.
There's a
and I think, oh, sorry, I just quickly make a point and then go to Lisa. I think that raises a really good point, which is, you know, I've gone through these pieces of evidence, but it may be that in some areas of the country, some of them are much more, give a much bigger evidential value than others, if you know what I mean, because they're just more, you know, they exist more, or they're more detailed. And so it, you know, it will be a little bit of, you know, what we're trying to build up with Don't Lose Your Way is a bit of that information and that knowledge across areas. And so, you know, hopefully we can work together to do that. Lisa? If you're on mute, if you're talking, or I don't know.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, I'm sad. I forgot all about this and only joined in about 20 minutes ago. I just had one of those days. It's really tough at the moment, with my health. So I feel sad about that. So how does this next session differ from what I've missed tonight?
So the plan was, I mean, this is a bit experimental, so we don't know, but the plan is to basically, people can maybe go away from this one. And if John can circulate the video maybe between the sessions, if you can watch it back.
Okay, lovely.
And then we can have a bit more of a longer question and answer session at the next meeting if people have got questions. It may be that we all come along and no one's got any questions, but we'll and if people have got things that come up today that they think, I'd like to know a bit more about that, then if they can either tell me now or tell John in between.
Follow up, yeah, great.
Yeah, a follow up, exactly. Yeah, it's a follow up. Yeah.
So I think Ian has his hand up, and then Tim.
Cool. Shall I go next then? You mentioned that, so I may have a few questions. I probably won't get through them all today. You mentioned that the council has a list of all the records that they looked at. Do you say that's something you're already requesting from them? Because it's something I was actually thinking of asking them for.
Yeah, so I've had an initial conversation a while ago with the council about that. We need to, probably me and Tim need to follow up on that at some point, or sort of locally as well. I need to know. Yeah, we would. I think we would like to request those. Hopefully they'll give us access. Yeah, there is information about their parish by parish review on the council website. I don't know how much of the real detailed information, exactly what records they looked at for each parish are there, but there is some really good information there. You're quite lucky in Devon, they have a lot of good guidance and information on the site. When relating to rights of way, I have no idea about anything else. Tim?
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether for the next meeting it's at all worth flashing up sort of the blue paths, i.e. the potential paths in the Clyst Valley Regional Park area, maybe taking some of the parishes that go along it and just having a look at what's there on the map today for people who haven't been on to have a look. We won't maybe show it all, but if we choose a couple of parishes that are running along the Clyst Valley, and just, I could do a snapshot, or you, Jack, and just show what's there now, just so people can see the sort of thing we're talking about.
Yeah, that sounds great. I can hopefully share my screen and I can do it live on the map. Yeah, that sounds good. And if we do a mixture of that and questions and any other detail stuff, I think that would be a good session. And we've all, yeah, that sounds a good idea.
And John and Simon, I don't know if there's any particular parishes that we have more interest, do you think, because they cover more of the area than some others? I don't know, but obviously we can just choose a couple that's up there. But Clyst area, Clyst in the word, I guess, is going to be a good one to choose. But if there are any that are particularly useful, if you let us know, we can sort of focus on those.
Yeah, okay, we'll do that, Tim. That's great.
And one other thing, I know we've got a few minutes. I will say that Devon County Council, you're quite right, do have a lot of resources on their site. I've got a meeting with the new rights of way manager on Thursday, Richard Clayton, I think his name is, who's just replaced Richard, I don't know his surname actually. But anyway, so I'll raise some of these things with him then as well, and maybe Jack set up a call with him so we can look at some of these questions in more detail as we go forward.
That'd be great. I think it's worth saying that all of this, the Ramblers are really keen to work with local authorities, to push this forward, and actually the more detailed and the better quality applications that we can make, the better that is for local authorities as well, because it's the easier for them to process. But yeah, no, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. And sorry, I know I'm monopolizing it now, but I see a question from Robin about how do we choose an area and avoid duplicating. I guess if you want to contact me, I know which parishes are being dealt with, as long as people have told me. There may be one or two where people are working on it. So I can say if anybody is looking at that. And also it doesn't necessarily matter if it is duplicated to some degree, because if we get different views on the same parish, it may not necessarily be a problem. But if you want to drop me an email, I can tell you if somebody's already looking at that parish, or who the coordinator is, because we've broken it down as well into extra district, East Devon, South Devon, North Devon. So I can also pass you on to the coordinator for that area as well, who can work more closely with you on that particular parish, if that's of interest.
Can I just clarify, Tim? Is that Tim?
Yeah.
The email address that we shared earlier.
Yes, correct.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It's showing up as Karen, but it's Tim.
Yeah, no, I can't. But on these Zooms, I can't change the name. I don't know what the difference is, but others I can. But this one I can.
Tim, do you want to just drop it into the chat again, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I can probably do that.
And that's a kind offer from you to do that coordination role. Thank you.
It's worth saying, on the duplication point of view, we very much see that could be an issue, especially if we get loads of people involved with this. The prioritization that we've got on the map, anyone can suggest a priority and multiple people can, but we're also developing that map further, and where we'll be getting to within the next month or two is being able to, once people have signed up to be a volunteer, to actually either someone like Tim or myself assigning people to paths upon their request, or people saying themselves, I want to research this path. And so that way we can coordinate a lot more on the map and digitally between us all, so we can make sure that there's no or little wasted effort as possible.
Do I have time for one final question? So a lot of documents are held at the National Archives, and there's a few at the Parliamentary Archives. Now, I've been to the County Archives once so far, and I'm probably booking my second research visit soon. Is there any support available for the Ramblers if we have a particularly promising piece of material we want to look at, but we can't get easily to the National Archives? Any support for members to get hold of that?
Yes, there is. There are two things that we can do along that. One is that we can look at getting a bit of funding to get some of those really core documents from the National Archives sort of bulk digitized. So, for instance, the Finance Act map plans are quite easy to digitize in the archives, and they're all in the same place and things like that. But the main thing, because that doesn't, that involves some steps and making sure we've got the money. But the main thing is that we did have a trial of a scheme with some local volunteers, Ramblers volunteers who live in Southwest London and Surrey, who could go to the archives upon request, get a list of things that people need, take photographs and email it and upload it to people. We unfortunately had that trial, and then COVID happened and the archives closed. So we are in the steps at the moment of reviving that plan. So we can, because we know if you're in somewhere like Devon or Yorkshire or whatever, it's a long way to go and expense and stuff to do that. So we will have that up and running hopefully by the end of this year, if not early next year. But there's still some complications at the moment because there are still some restrictions in the archives that we're sort of getting around at the moment. But yeah, we will have that in place, and we're working with the BHS to have a shared archive of documentary material, because it may be that someone else has taken a photo of a map for their application, but it's also relevant to yours. And so we are having a shared archive. So ultimately, we want everything to go in one place so people can access it all.
Thank you.
Doesn't look like there's any more questions. We're 1 minute to go. That sort of worked out quite nicely.
If we do that, can I ask a really very randomly specific question about the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act, the one that extinguished vehicular access? Did that only extinguish vehicular access? Did it also extinguish any other rights of way?
Yeah, that's good. You've asked me the only question about the NERC Act that I can probably answer, because I think it's slightly complicated piece of legislation. But yeah, it only extinguished vehicular rights, so mechanized rights.
Okay, so is there any reason I shouldn't put a road in as a restricted byway then, rather than say a bridleway?
No, you can definitely, restricted byway is fine, because it's the NERC Act stop motorized rights, whereas the restricted byway is for non-motorized rights, if you see what I mean.
Okay,
So
great.
yeah, like and the general advice is you put in an application. The most likely application to succeed is you put in the status that the evidence suggests, because that is the most likely to succeed. So there are some Ramblers members who want things to be footpaths, but actually if the evidence suggests it's a private way or a restricted byway, that's what should go in, because that's got the most chance of success.
Great, thank you.
And thanks for getting involved already. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Just a very, very quick one for me, actually, Jack, is I've had a go at putting some suggested priorities on possible lost paths in the Clyst Valley, and I guess everybody can contribute. So you'll have one line on a map, but everybody can contribute their thoughts on that line. So if someone disagrees with me and thinks it should be a lower priority, they can say so and put some text in.
Yeah, so how it works is that currently what's available is anyone can suggest a priority. We will be introducing the next release of the map, that certain roles of the Ramblers, particularly the Don't Lose Your Way coordinator and others, will then be able to look at what's been suggested and confirm a priority based upon those suggestions. So if 2 or more people put a priority on a path and they're different, then the coordinator can make a decision about that. And it's worth saying with the prioritization, it is a guide. It's never going to be completely 100%, and priorities may change over time. What is a priority now might become less of a priority when we see there's not that much evidence, or what is a low priority now might become a high priority because of another path is not able to be put on the map. And so it's a iterative and moving thing slightly, but it is trying to give us some guide about what is the most important ones to look at least from a utility point of view, because always we've got to realize that we might love this path to go on the map, this particular path to go on the map, but if we start to look into it and there's not the evidence there, unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that.
Great. John?
Did you say John?
I did.
Oh yeah, sorry, that wasn't a question. That was me posting a message to you, Simon, about logistics.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I said, it'd be great if people did have things they wanted to sort of talk about or address next time. And if not, we can just look at the map a bit in more detail and go from there, or people can bring questions to the meeting and hopefully I can answer them.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Jack, for giving us your time and your knowledge and insight on Don't Lose Your Way. That's been really great, and I hope that everyone will be keen to come back in 8 days' time for the follow-up session where we'll get the chance to ask some questions that we've reflected upon. And if any of you have specific questions that you think of in the coming days, do email them to me and I can forward them to Jack, or so that he's got a chance to think about particular issues in time for the next session. And so I think the only other thing that remains to say is thanks everyone for coming along and giving us your time and being interested in Don't Lose Your Way. Whether you're interested in it from the perspective of the Clyst Valley or elsewhere where you live, it's great to have you on board.
Yeah, thanks for coming. It's been great to see people.
Brilliant. I'll stop the recording now.